The next regulatory agency we're going to look at is the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. This is why your radio, your live television, all of that stuff is delayed. So they regulate anything that deals with like mass communication. Even your phone has a FCC charge to it because the telephones are federal communications. So when you get your bill, you'll see a FCC tax on it. Everything that is a live performance, like an award show, an athletic event, all of these things are actually going to be regulated by the government. They're going to have a 30-second delay on it. When you look at your television programming, it always has like a parental mark on it, and it's telling you what's the appropriate age for it. So the Federal Communications Commission has told companies, you got to say what the age is, but you also have got to make certain that when you do a live program that it's appropriate to the age. So no cursing, none of that. Same thing with like radio. It's why when you buy a song versus listening to it on the radio, it's going to be very different. Or you listen to it on YouTube versus listening to it on the radio, because you have to be careful with the mass communication. So the government does not allow vulgar language, sexually suggestive language at different times of the day, and based on the audience as well. The next thing we're going to look at is our federal enforcement of law. So laws that are being enforced by our federal government. When you look at our federal government, we're talking about our central national U.S. government. So they have a Department of Justice, or the DOJ. The Department of Justice is led by our Attorney General of the United States. Basically, this person acts as a lawyer for our country. So in any international incident, any lawsuit, anything like that, the Attorney General is going to act as our legal guide, our legal counsel in those kind of incidences. The Attorney General also advises the President on how to act in certain cases, what's the legal issues here, constitutional issues. So the Attorney General is going to lead the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice does a lot of kind of oversight stuff. One of the things that they do investigate a lot is states. So anytime you have some incidences in states, the Department of Justice might get involved in it. So if the state is trying to make a law that is not really legal, the Department of Justice might go ahead and tell the state, hey, if you do this, it's unconstitutional. And they might do that before you really start seeing the federal government starting to place penalties on the state. And penalties would be they take away federal money. So the Department of Justice does a lot with civil rights cases, civil liberty cases. But they also review states' prison systems. They review cases in states. So if someone has been convicted of a crime or a family member feels that their loved one was wrongfully convicted, they can write to the Department of Justice, and the Justice Department might review the case. They'll look there to see if there's something that went wrong, and if so, they'll start to investigate further. They do investigate a lot of the prison systems in states. Remember, under our Constitution, prisoners are to be treated fairly. No cruel, no unusual punishment. That's that 8th Amendment. So if they start to notice that there's a high rate of death or illness in certain prisons, they're going to start investigating states. Budgets have been really hard in the last years for states. So a lot of states have had severe cuts on how much tax money they've been able to bring in because of the economy for their state. So a lot of states have actually reduced their money they're spending on their prison system. So remember, states run their prison systems. The Department of Corrections in each of the states, they run theirs, but they are still monitored by the federal government to make sure they're treating prisoners fairly. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, they are going to have federal jurisdiction on issues, anything that's like crossing state lines. The FBI gets involved. They get involved in kidnapping, any domestic terrorism. They have a white collar crimes division. And white collar is like business kind of crimes. This is not like you doing the arrest of like your local everyday criminals. Like white collar crimes would be something like embezzlement of money from a business, lying about how well your business is doing, things like that. So they investigate white collar crimes. They also investigate art theft. That's something the FBI looks at. They have a whole art theft division. They investigate civil rights cases. So they have a lot of things they investigate. The U.S. Secret Service, the people who protect our president and the vice president, they are part of our federal enforcement of the law. So that's their main job, but they also have this other job where they investigate counterfeiting. Counterfeiting is any illegal reproduction of money. So you got a nice fancy printer at your house, you decide you're going to print out a sheet of 100s. That's counterfeiting, and the Secret Service actually investigates counterfeit money. The next law enforcement we're going to look at is at state level. So our state would be North Carolina. So North Carolina has the State Bureau of Investigation, the SBI. Similar to the FBI, but their jurisdiction is only here in the state. They have a DNA lab, so you probably have heard on the news about the state lab. The DNA lab for our state collects all DNA from around our counties, our city, police enforcements, and they collect it, they keep it. A lot of times, you might live in a bigger city like Fayetteville. We have like DNA people here, but when you look at very small North Carolina towns, which a lot of North Carolina is still very rural, very country, they don't. A lot of places in North Carolina don't have a police force. They just have the sheriff's department. They just have county. They don't have a city area as well. So they actually would collect any DNA evidence and send it to the State Bureau of Investigation, the state lab, and the lab would investigate. They still do the same thing here in Fayetteville. They're going to still send the stuff there, but they are trying to make certain that the law is carried out fairly and equally. So the SBI investigates rape and murder cases because you're going to have, of course, your DNA there. Sorry, it's not cases. So they investigate things like that. They try and make certain that the information has never been contaminated. So when you take DNA, you have to be very careful. It could be contaminated easily, so the state is looking at that. And then the next time, let's say some more stuff comes in, what the state does, any more DNA evidence, they run it against all the other stuff that they have to see if someone is a repeat offender or a recidivist. National Guard is something that our governor of our state is allowed to call up. They call them up in a state of emergency. So here in North Carolina, lots of hurricanes, flooding. So when the flooding happens, and we know the flooding is going to occur, like the rivers are getting really too tall, they're about to crest, they're about to go over their bounds, the governor might ask the National Guard, he might call them out and say, you need to evacuate this area. So the National Guard is going to go from door to door and try and help evacuate people. You have a lot of people who are elderly, who are disabled, who might not be able to get out of their house. So the National Guard would be able to do that. They would be able to help them out. when the governor orders them out, they order them out only like when it's really bad. There is truly a state of emergency in the state. The last thing that we're going to look at is our local enforcement of our law. So our city and county law enforcement. Your sheriff runs your county. The sheriff and the deputies, okay, that's who does the county law enforcement. So if you're on a county road, it's going to be a sheriff deputy who will pull you. The sheriff is elected by the county. So people who live in the county are going to go ahead and they're going to elect their sheriff. And then you have your deputies who do your day-to-day stuff. Anything that is a county area, like schools. Schools in Cumberland County are Cumberland County schools. That would be the sheriff's department, and that is why you have deputies in the school. The police department is going to have a police chief who is hired by your city council. So the chief of police, and then you have the police officers. The police officers do most of your day-to-day law enforcement in our nation. And they're the ones who, if you're in the city, they're going to issue you the tickets. They do the investigations in the city as well.